Hi there. So, welcome to a video on detail in higher English. The focus in this will be really looking at the level of comment that you're making, especially if you're finding that your scores are a bit low in Scottish set text and that you're not really achieving the scores that you would like, and that your teacher is thinking that perhaps the problem is that you're not really understanding what detail is. So this video will endeavour to try and explain and show you the differences between National 5 and higher. So at higher, the answer scheme contains this for teachers. It tells you you can award one mark, sorry, for a basic comment, 2 marks for detailed and insightful comments. Now, so we're clear, this is very rare. It's not given out much. Teachers, I know as a teacher, I am very careful about awarding that. You need to make two very clear, distinct points for me to do it, and it doesn't happen very often. Many of you tend to rush your analysis, and as a result, don't write that, and teachers can be a bit cautious about it. I would strongly encourage you never to rely on this. When approaching this, if you're doing a 4-mark analysis question, which is pretty standard type of question, at National 5, you could quote and explain. That would get you 4 marks because you were getting, 2 marks in total for quoting correctly. At higher, you get nothing for quoting. So you need to quote, explain, quote, explain, quote, explain, quote, explain 4 times. Now, tell you now, a number of you will drop a huge amount of marks. So you can drop 4 marks alone simply not doing it properly. So you only write 2 things in one question, 2 things in another, 2 things in another, and you've dropped half your marks before you've gotten anywhere near the final question. Now, I know my sums aren't adding up, but it's just to make a point here. So it's really to kind of get across to you how important it is that you write enough, because many of you know your poems inside out, you know what you need to say about them. So if your issue is, actually that your time management's the problem, then that is something that you do need to think about. And at the end, I do make a number of suggestions for things that you could consider. So we're going to look at FAB because it's a lot easier to do that, because you all have to do the same 6 poems rather than the unfamiliarity of RUE. And some of you get this passage, but you've struggled with that passage, so it's a bit trickier. But these principles apply to RUE as well in terms of detail. Now, remember, depth in higher textual analysis is something that is expected. I'm just going to take this out. I did take it out, but PowerPoint's getting very funny with me whenever I try to make changes. So there we go. So basically, I was just removing that when I made this, Duffy was compulsory at National 5. It is again, but some of you didn't do Duffy last year, so that's why I've taken it out. Y'all did Scottish text last year, so you do know that you can get away with a very basic comment at National 5. A basic comment at higher is still expecting a lot more. You got to remember what they're going to give a mark for when you're doing National 5 and what they're going to give 1 mark for at higher cannot be the same thing. Okay, so let's have a look at some analysis without a question. So remember, you've always got to answer the question, but for the purposes of this, I'm wanting to just focus on the detail rather than the answer in the question. So we have a quote here from Mrs. Tilshire that says, "Inky tadpoles change from commas into exclamation marks. This shows the speaker grew up." Now, I'm going to be honest, even by National 5 standards, that's a dodgy, pretty lazy comment here. There's no real engagement with the language. It could apply to nearly any quote ever. So yeah, that's no good. It's rubbish. And you absolutely should not be writing anything that big. It shows the speaker grew up because the punctuation develops in terms of size and sophistication. Now, I would say that's fine at National 5. For higher, it's still too vague. Okay, you are relying on a very generous marker to give you a mark there. Okay, and the minute you are relying on the personality of your marker, your SQA marker's coming home and marking hundreds of these, and they mark the essays and your Scottish text. They're marked anonymously, but they contracts usually are something like 180. You need to make this as easy as possible for this person to just give you the marks. And that's asking them to sit and think about whether they would. Well, Again, now I know when teachers talk about detail, it just means, oh, well, it's a paragraph. It is quality rather than quantity we're looking for. It's not just waffle, it is that idea of engaging. Now, you'll see immediately it says it's a metaphor. Okay. Now, whilst you don't get marks for identifying quotes, these things can ground you. And how do you approach that? You could just ask so to it if you wanted to, that sort of thing. So, this metaphor shows that the speaker grew up because the punctuation develops in terms of size and sophistication. It's very similar to the previous one. A comma is smaller and more passive than the forcefulness of an exclamation mark. Let's see, I'll fix this as I go. And which also shows how children's personalities are developing in puberty. So a comma is smaller and more passive than the forcefulness of an exclamation mark, which also shows how the children's personalities are developing in puberty. Yeah, that's fine, and that would get a mark. Okay. Now, before you panic, because the other thing pupils do is then, if analysis isn't word for word identical across classes, they feel they've not been taught something. You're all being taught the right things about these. Teachers and pupils all find their own ways of phrasing these things. So if your language and your annotations and things for this imagery point is different to what I've just said, that's fine. Remember how 30 pupils in a class describe this metaphor will vary compared to, and you know, it's just not something to worry about, basically. But hopefully you've recognised that the comma and the exclamation mark are different sizes. So one is smaller than the other, and one is more powerful. An exclamation mark is much more powerful, forceful exclamation mark than a comma. So that's kind of what I am covering here. I've added in another sentence that says growing up is further developed as the tadpole's image is also extended in reference to frogs. Now, I want to show you what I mean there. That's trying to explain that. Now, I think it could still be better if I'm honest, but this is doing nothing, right? So I've written this sentence, I've not finished it, I've hurt my hand in the process of a very busy writing exam. How is it? What does tadpoles into frogs mean? Okay, I should be explaining that, okay, like their physical development or they're becoming more mature or blah, 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 something like that. I've just left it lying. And the minute you are expecting your marker to work out your answer, you're not going to get the mark. So you can see here what I'm saying about 2 marks. It looks like I've written tons compared to the others, but this last sentence is going nowhere and it's not going to get a mark, this growing up sentence. Okay, let's move on to Mrs. Midas then. It's so this shows Mr. and Mrs. Midas can no longer sleep together and have to be apart for safety. Yeah, it's fine. It's very National 5 though. Okay, so we get a mark at National 5. But even then, ideally you should be talking about the techniques in it. Short sentence shows the blunt end to the Midas marriage in terms of their physical relationship, but also to their marriage generally. This is harsh in its tone, showing Mrs. Midas's practicality in having to deal with a difficult situation. Now, again, I've made 2 comments. I would say it's more of a 1-point thing. I feel more could be done with the short sentence thing, but again, it shows you now this is a very sort of common response where neither technique is fully committed to. Okay. Let's have a look at this one. Short sentence shows the blunt end to the marriage in terms of their physical relationship, but also to their marriage generally. This uses an abrupt tone showing Mrs. Midas's practicality in having to deal with a very difficult situation, and it contrasts effectively with the previous description of their physical relationship, in which we see how hurtful this estrangement will be for both of them as they had, quote, a passionate relationship. So again, trying to say a little bit more here. So I hope this indicates that at higher try to say a little bit more. Okay. Now, I did say before, sorry, about the short sentence. You could say it's isolated from the rest of the verse, that sort of thing. Okay. But some quotes are developed there, the contrast is there. In a 10 marker, you'd really be looking to go on and develop that contrast potentially. But remember, all of these have no questions, so that's why they're very generalised. Now, you absolutely cannot write generalised analysis, but at the moment, this is more about detail and about trying to write a little bit more before you even get to the question. The question should help you focus your answer. So you're not having to do this, I'm going to write everything I can possibly think of about this quote. It's how is it relevant? Now, it is trickier with questions, so let's have a look. So we've got Midas here, and back in tadpole section of the poem. Analyse how the poet uses language to convey the idea the children are grown up. So this is just a 2-mark question. Okay, so here's the answer scheme. Now, what I wanted to draw your attention to for this was Inky Tadpole's change into frog suggests physical journey to maturity. Commas into exclamation marks suggest development from childish acceptance to heightened sense of emotion, refusal to conform to adult expectation. Jumping and croaking suggests that awkward and inarticulate self-consciousness and developing maturity. Do you see the language there? Now, that's the other thing. Working on developing your own language can help really improve your answer. You notice they're not just saying they got bigger, that sort of thing, okay? So that gives you a wee idea. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you one here. It says the basic children are growing up because it says tadpoles and frogs, which show the children are physically getting older and maturing. Now, that is just going to get a mark and no more because it does say physical journey to maturity, so that's fine. You know, jumping and croaking, you'd be allowed to make a point about, you know, the idea of the boys' voices breaking as they enter puberty and are maturing, whatever. You're not getting a mark for saying maturity, maturity, maturity. Remember, these answer schemes are just a guide to teachers. They are not the only answer. English's great strength and great weakness, of course, is there's no right answer, which means that you can write something different to your pal or something very similar to your pal. And write something very different, get a mark, and write something that seems the same but it's not and it doesn't get a mark. So remember, you can't expect a mark for the exact same word. You need to vary your language when you're writing these things. That gives you an idea. Now, if you've written that and that's it, and I've very deliberately done this, it's 1 out of 2. That's you. You've dropped a mark. Now, if you're doing that 50% of the time, you're just hemorrhaging marks. So that is why some of you may be getting really low scores. You're never going to get more than 10 if you're dropping 2, dropping 2, dropping 2, dropping 5. That, you know, that sort of thing. Eventually, these points add up. Now, that's not to say you can't ever run out of time, you can't ever make a wee mistake. The point of these early assessments in English are that they're to help you. They're to help you see how do you cope under time conditions without your notes, those sorts of things, okay? So really try and take an assessment in a sort of growth mindset kind of way of how can I improve, not, oh my goodness, I failed, what's the point? I'm just not going to try. So I hope these things help. And, you know, I'm hoping nothing in it's too revelatory, to be honest, because I think most of you know this stuff, so I am hoping that it really is confirming things you know you need to work on. So I'm just going to summarise this for you here. Are you writing enough? 4 marks, 4 points. Okay, very few of you will get 2 and 2. It's that simple. Do not rely on 2 marks for a detailed comment because you may have wandered off topic. You may have done what I did earlier, and my second point's not that detailed. Your teachers do want to give you the marks, okay? So make it easy for them. You know, try and explain it. Now, I know I haven't gone into lots of detail of looking at a question, but for many of you, this will be the problem, that you're not writing enough. Now, time conditions do play a part in that. So, from what you've seen, are you writing 1-mark answers? And if you're honest with yourself, you may find that you are. Now, that's also not to say that sometimes you just don't get the answer wrong. That's a totally different issue. But that shouldn't really be happening here the way it happens in RUE sometimes, where you've just misread something that you've never seen before. And it seems obvious, but you'd be amazed the number of times pupils drop marks in RUE and Duffy because they're not answering the question they were asked. Now, in Duffy, a more common error even is going to the wrong part of the poem. You must go to the part, look at lines 1 to 10, where you go to lines 1 to 10. You cannot just decide you're going to quote from line 11. That's just when it's wrong. And you know yourselves, it's not often things are wrong, capital letters in English, you know, but that is one of the few times where it doesn't matter how good your analysis is. And often you'll just hurt your hand because you're writing and writing and writing and it's just wrong because you know, were a bit careless and where to look. But are you answering exactly what you were asked? Now, this is especially true in the 10-mark question. Higher often has a sting in its tail about things like The 2023 question at National 5 was for Duffy was loss, the theme of loss. The higher question, the 10 marker, was the impact of loss. Now, they're not the same thing. Okay. Theme of loss is very open. When you're being asked about the impact of loss, that's not asking you to explain just what the loss was, but also what happened as a result of it. Okay. So remember, you must read those questions carefully. What can you do? So, are you relying on an annotated poem and that's it? Because that can be dangerous. Annotations are a very brief summary. They're a quick check guide to make sure you understand things. Annotate it again, get a fresh copy of the poem, annotate it again is a good way to learn it. But again, that will not help you with detail. In terms of detail, you'll need vision cards. Now, these can be physical, they can be on like, is it Quizlet or Quizzes? One of them forget makes it or slides. Are you giving yourself enough supporting points? You know, a quote on one side, bullet points on the other, or bullet points underneath. Someone at home might be happy to test you and you can explain it to them. How do you revise? If you revise better copying things out, then that's, and I know I'm good at that. Or teaching someone, telling someone about it, even if it's your dog or something like that, but getting it into your head. The number of song lyrics for songs many of you don't even like that you will have down pat, hearing it can help you as well. What you should be making sure you know are the points you want to say, the techniques, what does the quote mean, what is your explanation basically for that quote, so that the important thing you're doing is pivoting to a question in the exam. What should be new is what you're being asked. Not, all right, it wants me to talk about that. Oh my goodness, what does that quote mean? What do you say about that? Oh God, what's that technique? Oh goodness, what do I do now? You know, it should just be, right, I know it means this, I know it means that. That's how, right, I'll do that one. You know, we are pivoting to the question rather than trying to recall what you were taught. And making sure that you know your quotes inside out is the way to go. There will be support videos on the poems, there'll be slides, there's all sorts of things like bite size and various things. And if you're struggling, ask your teacher in the first instance or ask me in the second, and we will make sure that you have the support if you can't find it, but making sure that you're reinforcing your knowledge with things as well. Okay. So those will definitely help. Past papers absolutely help as well. There's only so many past papers you can do though, and what I would say is you can practice 10 markers more effectively if you change the exam poem. So if you're doing a Mrs. Midas past paper, the 10 marker, obviously for your exam poem, you do Mrs. Midas, but if you can, you could change the exam poem, make it another appropriate poem, like, I don't know, say it's Wordtographer, and then that means you can open up different other poems. Equally, you could just do more in your 10 marker. So say you're doing Mrs. Midas and you do Mrs. Midas for your exam poem, you choose to bring in originally as your other poem, well, bring in another poem. Or, you know, how many can you do? Sometimes what to do is to try and revise more with what you've got rather than I'm going to do 20 million different questions before the FAB, and then by May you've run out of past papers, because there is a limited number available. They did refresh them, the poems a few years ago now. So that is something else you can do as well. Also go over your answers. What have you done wrong? Okay. If your teacher gives you something back and it's not right, looking at it honestly, you know, don't beat yourself up and don't ignore it. They're two extremes, but look at it honestly. What could you have done differently? With time, what would you have added in? Those sorts of things as well. Now, I hope this has helped. Like I say, this was purely about showing you the difference in detail. So I know it's a fairly brief video, but I hope it's helped. And good luck with the rest of your English study this year.